Greetings, listeners. I'm starting a new thing on here, which I'm calling my thought of the day. There will be no visuals. This is going to be just audio, not going to be heavily edited or anything. I'm just going to come on here and share what I'm thinking for the day, and I will not do this every day. I might not even do it most days, but I'm going to do this because I want to have an avenue to express a lot of the things that run through my mind every day. I have thoughts every day, probably, and I think I could post that on YouTube, and I just don't really have a video to put it in. So this is sort of my answer to that. So I'm just going to jump right into my thought of the day. Today's thought is Jesus, Lord, Lunatic, or Liar. Now, if you are a person who is either religiously affiliated with Christianity and has sort of gone into the deeper lore of apologetics, then you probably already know what I'm going to say here. And if you are a person who is an atheist, you probably are dreading what I'm about to say, because it probably seems like I'm about to make the same argument that C.S. Lewis has made a lot of times. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to be sharing my big problem with this argument, because this is something that's come up before, and I'm not the first person to make this counterpoint, but I want to illustrate it in a way that I think is pretty effective. So, if you don't know what the Lord, Lunatic, or Liar argument is, it's an argument put forward by C.S. Lewis, who a lot of you may know as the author of the Chronicles of Narnia books. Very good books, some of my favorites. And he was also a Christian apologist a lot of the time. He was a theologian. So he would make these arguments, and some of his works that he would put forward, he made quasi-arguments in some of his children's books, but those were all based on the world of Narnia and didn't really mention Jesus specifically. But when he did release books that talked about Jesus specifically, he very heavily made these arguments. One of the books being More Than a Carpenter. I think that was C.S. Lewis's book. But anyway, the argument basically goes like this. Jesus had to be who he said he was, because since Jesus went around and claimed to be God, he was either Lord or a lunatic or was lying. Since most people agree that he wasn't mad, and most people would agree that Jesus wasn't a liar, that just leaves the possibility that he was who he said he was, that he was God. So, putting aside the fact that lunatic and madness are sort of reductive terms and sort of ableist terms as we now understand mental illness, putting that aside, I have an issue, firstly, with the way that this frames the argument, assuming that Jesus claimed to be God, and sort of taking that as a foregone conclusion. But even setting aside that as well, there is one big, major problem with this argument that is, as I said, been pointed out before. I'm going to give you an analogy. If you're Christian, or any other faith, imagine that you have a neighbor. This neighbor's a good person. This neighbor goes around and does nice things for the community, is a very charitable person, has a lovely family. But this neighbor differs from you on religion. They say, my particular faith, my particular God or gods, or what it is they believe in, directs me to do these things. And you have a faith that is very different from theirs, or perhaps you have no faith, and you look at this person and they're a good person, but you just can't bring yourself to say that you agree with what they're saying. You don't believe any of it. You think it's a fantasy. But this person's a good person. They're still going around and helping people. And they say, well, my religion directs me to do this. It is only through my religion that I'm able to do what I'm doing. Okay. What would you think, and you probably have a neighbor like that, or a coworker, or someone you know, what would you think if I went to you and said, that person is either correct, or they're insane, or they're lying? What would you say to that? What would you say to those extremes? Those very restricting parameters I put up? you probably would say, I don't think they're any of those things. I don't think they're right, but I also don't think they're insane, and I don't think they're lying. I think they're just mistaken. I think they're just misguided. They're doing good things, but their reasoning, I think, is just not there as far as it being actually true, but they're not harming anyone. They're not going around saying things that would make me think that they're actually deluded or something. They're just mistaken. It's just a good person who's mistaken. And what I want to know is, why could that not have been the case for Jesus? Why couldn't Jesus have just made an honest mistake? Why couldn't Jesus have just thought he was the Son of God and just wasn't? And he said the wrong thing to the wrong person, and they ended his life over it. Why couldn't that have been the case? That's what I want to know. Now, there are all kinds of things that Jesus claimed that you might say, someone wouldn't say this unless they were either serious or they were very, very wrong to a disturbing level, which might suggest some instability. But you have to keep in mind the beliefs at the time. Jesus was considered an apocalyptic prophet. But consider the beliefs at the time, and consider some of the things that people say who have religious views that you might not agree with, that you might call extreme. Even those people, a lot of the time, would you say those people are quote-unquote insane or just mistaken? And I don't like this argument, this Lord Lunatic or Liar argument, because it seems pretty obvious to me whether Lewis was intending this or not. It seems very obvious to me that it's constructed in such a way where you can obviously answer it. It's the classic tactic of asking a question and then implying the answer. Saying, why is this way? It's because of this. Let alone, or setting aside the fact that the person did not actually ask that question. You asked the question. And this is similar. You're setting up the three possibilities. Lord Lunatic Liar. It has to be one of those three. Does it? Does it really? I'm far more interested in whether there's actual evidence for what Jesus had to say, and by and large, things that are not just incidental and historical, his supernatural claims themselves. I don't think there's any good evidence for those things, and that's why I don't believe those things. But even if you do, I don't think what C.S. Lewis said is a good way to justify that belief. That's my thought of the day. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, allons-y.